22nd, 2025. Remember this day. It was 2 in the morning. Inside Iran, in a bunker that doesn't appear on public maps, a radar operator was monitoring the system his country had built for one very specific purpose: to make Iran untouchable. And then, the monitors went silent. There was no alarm, no window of time for an interception, no trace on the screens. 3 of Iran's most protected nuclear facilities, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, were hit by weapons that the country's radar never detected arriving. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why what happened in the early hours of June 22, 2025 wasn't just a military strike. It was a live test of a theory on which Iran staked its national security, its sovereignty, and the promise made to its own people that certain things were inviolable. And the theory failed. The question this video exists to answer is this: how does a $2.1 billion aircraft cross an air defense network that took a decade and multiple layers of investment to build and generate no signal? How does the B-2 Spirit simply vanish from systems specifically designed to detect it? This question isn't about planes. It's about the calculation that every country that builds its security on underground facilities and layered defenses has made, and that June 22nd proved wrong. It's the most important question in the global deterrence architecture of our generation, because the answer changes the math for every adversary of the United States that built its security on the same theory Iran adopted. You're about to understand all of this. The answer starts with what Iran built, and what was promised this system would be able to do. To understand the failure of June 22nd, you first need to understand the scale and seriousness of the investment Iran made. The Iranian leadership spent decades building what the Pentagon itself described as one of the densest air defense networks in the Middle East. And the investment the country made over those decades was, by any objective metric, serious. The centerpiece of this architecture was the S-300. And the story behind this system says a lot about how seriously Iran took the aerial threat. Iran had been trying to buy the S-300 from Russia since the 2000s. A contract was signed in 2007, and then Russia canceled the delivery in 2010, giving in to international sanctions pressure. This left Iran with a significant hole in its defense architecture for 6 years. 6 years in which any power with advanced aerial capability would have a real window. In 2016, after the JCPOA nuclear deal lifted the arms embargo, Russia finally delivered the S-300 PMU-2, 4 batteries, a system with a radar detection range of up to 300 kilometers for conventional targets, the capability to track multiple targets simultaneously. The backbone of the long-range layer of Iranian defense was finally in place, but Iran didn't stop there. In 2019, the country unveiled the Bavar 373, a domestically developed air defense system presented as the Iranian answer to the S-300 and, according to the country's authorities, superior to it in several aspects. The Bavar 373 was introduced with claims of an interception range of up to 200 kilometers and the ability to track multiple simultaneous targets. The narrative was clear. Iran no longer depended on foreign systems. It had built its own layer. The integration of these systems was under the command of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Air Defense, the IRGC, the organization responsible for turning imported and domestic hardware into a network of overlapping coverage. The architecture included short-range, medium-range, and long-range systems integrated by radars with sequential coverage. The logic was solid in theory. Even if a threat penetrated the outer layer, the next layer would detect it, and the next, and the next. And regarding Fordow specifically, the facility buried between 80 and 100 meters below solid rock in the Qom province, Iranian officials were explicit. Fordow was invulnerable to airstrikes. It wasn't a casual claim. It was an official position, repeated by multiple officials, a central part of the deterrence narrative that Iran had carefully built over years. That claim lasted until June 22, 2025. The architecture was in place. The investment was real. The claims were public. The question that remains open and that we need to face now is why everything that had been built with such care simply didn't work. The answer starts with what the B-2 Spirit actually is. Let me start with the architecture you need to understand, before any of the current events make sense at the level they actually operate. The B-2 Spirit wasn't created to defeat Iran. It was created to defeat the Soviet Union. More precisely, it was created to penetrate Soviet air defenses, one of the densest and most sophisticated ever built and reached targets in the heart of a first-tier enemy without being detected. The program began in the 1970s and entered operational service in 1997. The cost per aircraft reached $2.1 billion when development costs are included. The total fleet? 20 aircraft. Only 20. It is the smallest fleet of operational bombers in the U.S. military, and each unit represents an investment with no equivalent in any other arsenal in the world. The reason for this cost lies in physics. Stealth is not magical invisibility. It's engineering applied to radio wave reflection. A radar works by emitting energy pulses and measuring what returns. The more energy that returns, the more visible the object is. Radar cross-section RCS measures how much signal an object reflects back to the tracking radar. A conventional fighter has an RCS of approximately 1 to 3 square meters. A conventional bomber can have dozens of square meters. The B-2 Spirit has an RCS equivalent to a large bird, approximately 0.1 square meters. You need to stop and understand what this number means in practice. The S-300 was designed to detect targets with a minimum RCS of approximately 0.1 square meters, and even that requires ideal operating conditions. The B-2 presents a signal 100 times smaller than that minimum threshold. It's not that the S-300 radar sees the B-2 and can't track it. The S-300 radar doesn't see anything that looks like a threat. This is not a technical vulnerability of the S-300. It is a categorical difference. You cannot adjust your radar to detect the B-2 without fundamentally redesigning the entire system. Physics doesn't negotiate. The B-2 achieves this performance through two main mechanisms. First, the airframe design, the B-2's geometry. That characteristic tailless flying wing shape is designed to redirect radar waves away from the emitter, not back to it. Every surface, every angle, was calculated to minimize reflection. Second, radar-absorbent materials cover the aircraft's surface, converting part of the incident radar energy into heat instead of reflecting it back. The U.S. Department of Defense itself described the B-2 as capable of operating in high-density threat environments that would make any other non-stealth aircraft vulnerable. Before June 2025, the B-2 had been used operationally in Kosovo, Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan. In each of these conflicts, it penetrated air defenses without being intercepted. But none of these adversaries possessed systems like the S-300 or the Bavar 373, integrated into a dense network of overlapping coverage. June 2025 was different. For the first time, the B-2 went head-to-head with the best air defense a mid-sized state could reasonably build. And the result was the same. Now you understand why the B-2. But the B-2 alone would not have been enough for Fordo. Sit down. Because the story of the B-2 is only half the argument. The other half is geological. Fordo is not just underground. It was built inside a mountain, between 80 and 100 meters below solid rock and reinforced concrete. When Iran chose that location, the logic was precise. Depth is protection. No conventional bomb penetrates 80 meters of solid rock. If you cannot be detected, and even if you are detected, you cannot be destroyed, then you are, by definition, invulnerable. This is the Fordo doctrine. To destroy Fordo, you would need a weapon that didn't exist. So the United States built it. The GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator. The MOP weighs 30,000 pounds, 13,600 kilograms. It is the largest conventional bomb in the American arsenal, and it was designed for a very specific role: to penetrate deeply buried bunkers that had no threat equivalent before its creation. The penetration numbers for the GBU-57 are documented, up to 61 meters of reinforced concrete. With the right combination of attack trajectory and sequential impacts on the same spot, the depth destruction capability increases even further. For Fordo, which was built assuming no existing weapon could reach it, the GBU-57 was essentially a geological argument presented in explosive form. Not just a bomb, a geological argument. But here is what makes all of this unique in military aviation history. Only one aircraft in any arsenal in the world can carry and operationally deploy the GBU-57, the B-2 Spirit. Not because other aircraft aren't powerful enough, but because the GBU-57 is simply too large for the weapons bay of any other operational bomber. It was designed as an exclusive weapons system, an inseparable combination between the only platform that can deliver it and the only weapon that can destroy targets at the depth of Fordo. This was not accidental. It was a deliberate architectural decision. The United States spent decades ensuring that this specific capability penetrating facilities of this depth remained exclusive to the B-2. This means that for any adversary considering building buried facilities as a deterrent strategy, the American countermeasure was already in place, had already been tested, and was absolutely unique. No other country possesses an operational equivalent to the GBU-57. No other aircraft besides the B-2 can deliver it. And no other facility in Iran had incorporated this into its security calculations as explicitly and erroneously as Fordo. The question that remained was, when would the B-2 and the GBU-57 be used together? The answer was given on the night of June 21 to 22, 2025. On that night, B-2 Spirit aircraft took off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. This is not speculation, it is information confirmed by the U.S. Department of Defense in post-operation briefings. Imagine an American intelligence analyst in a situation room tracking the flight paths of 3 aircraft crossing Iranian airspace. On the opposite side, on the IRGC's Air Defense Network monitors, absolute silence, not an alarm, not an activated interception protocol, not a signal classified as a threat. It is in this silence that you understand what 18 months of diplomatic negotiations failed to resolve. 3 targets, 3 facilities that represented the backbone of the Iranian nuclear program. Fordo, the most symbolically significant facility, buried deep inside a mountain in Qom province, housing enrichment centrifuges and tunnels carved at depths that Iranian authorities called inviolable. The crown jewel, Natanz, Iran's main enrichment complex in Isfahan province. Natanz's centrifuge halls housed the largest concentration of enrichment capacity in Iran's nuclear program, the heart of the program. Isfahan, Iran's nuclear research and conversion center, which complemented the enrichment capabilities of the other 2 sites. The support system that kept everything running. Together, these 3 targets represented more than just technical capability. They represented years of investment, decades of know-how, and the physical infrastructure upon which any Iranian nuclear breakthrough depended. When you group these 3 targets, you aren't just counting concrete structures. You are accounting for the collapse of the strategic foundation that allowed the entire project to move forward. The result was documented. The facilities were destroyed. No aircraft were intercepted. The IRGC Air Defense Command recorded no successful interceptions. No radar track of an enemy aircraft was clear enough to generate a firelock. And this is where this story stops being about planes and starts being about something that will cost much more than destroyed facilities: the credibility of a system, the credibility of a theory, and the credibility of an export product worth billions. To understand why, with the real numbers, you need to understand the arithmetic of stealth. Now, the arithmetic. And this is the section where the question that opened this video receives its technical answer. The S-300 PMU-2 has a radar detection range of up to 300 kilometers for targets with conventional radar cross-sections. For a modern fighter, that's a warning window of approximately 15 to 20 minutes. Enough time to identify, classify, track, calculate trajectory, authorize fire, and launch an interceptor missile. The problem begins when you apply saturation arithmetic to the B-2. The B-2 has an RCS of 0.1 square meters. The S-300's minimum detection threshold to initiate reliable tracking is around 0.1 square meters, 100 times the signal the B-2 presents. This means that under standard operating conditions, the S-300 won't track the B-2 from 300 kilometers, nor 200, nor 100. It's not just a tactical advantage. It's an absolute asymmetry. Analysts from the Center for Strategic and International Studies have documented that, against low RCS aircraft like the B-2, the effective detection zones of systems like the S-300 shrink dramatically to ranges that, in practice, leave response windows of seconds, not minutes. 30 seconds. That's all that's left. Think about what that means operationally. A radar operator who detects the B-2 would have between 30 and 90 seconds to classify the threat, obtain fire authorization, prepare a launch, and have any chance of interception. This is not a viable operational window for any existing air defense doctrine. Saturation arithmetic works in reverse here. It's not the attacker who saturates the defender's interceptors. It's the B-2's radar signature that saturates the system's processing capacity with zero reliable signal, wiping out the response window before it even opens. What could the BAVAR 373 do with that signal? Its detection radars operate in frequency ranges similar to those of the S-300. The geometry of the problem is the same. The claim that the BAVAR 373 would have superior performance against conventional high RCS targets didn't translate into any significant advantage against a target with an RCS of 0.1. But here is the element that turns this failure from a hardware issue into a doctrinal one. Layered air defense, the logic that multiple systems covering multiple altitudes and ranges create redundancy, works when the systems in the layers share the same capability to detect a threat. If the threat is invisible to the outer layer, it is equally invisible to the inner layers that depend on the same radars or radars with the same fundamental frequency limitations. Iran's integrated air defense didn't have a layer designed specifically to detect aircraft with an RCS below 0.1 square meters. Not because Iranian engineers were incompetent, but because building that capability requires radar processing technology that, at the time the system was built, was not available to Iran. What the Iranian radar operators saw that early morning wasn't a small signal they couldn't track. It was background noise, statistical disturbance, nothing that the system's processing software would classify as an enemy aircraft. When the first explosions arrived, their origins still didn't exist on any radar screen. There is a question that strategic planners have been asking in silence for years, one that became truly urgent in the months leading up to June 2025. When is a line crossed irreversibly? The answer lies in the trajectory of nuclear negotiations with Iran in the 18 months preceding the attack. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, had limited Iranian enrichment to 3.67% purity and established verification mechanisms that the international community used as a barometer of intent. This agreement effectively collapsed with the American withdrawal in 2018 and was never fully reconstituted. What the inspection data from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, showed in the first half of 2025 was a documented and systematic escalation. Iran had advanced its enrichment to approximately 60% purity. For reference, weapons-grade uranium requires enrichment of 90% or above. At 60%, Iran did not yet have a weapon, but it had a capability that, in terms of conversion time to weapons grade, analysts from the International Institute for Strategic Studies calculated in a matter of weeks, not months. The negotiations that took place in Oman and Geneva in the preceding months did not produce a structural agreement. They produced tactical pauses. The records of the Geneva rounds, partially released after the attack, showed the Iranian delegation refusing verification mechanisms that the IAEA considered the bare minimum for any sustainable agreement. This wasn't a negotiating position, it was a structural refusal. The decision to authorize Operation Midnight Hammer didn't come out of nowhere. It arose from an assessment that the trajectory of Iranian enrichment had crossed a threshold where the distance to weapons capability was no longer great enough to absorb another cycle of negotiating delays. Throughout this entire period, Israel applied consistent pressure on Washington. The Israeli calculation was straightforward. Any nuclear-armed Iran permanently and asymmetrically changes the security architecture of the Middle East. This pressure, combined with American intelligence assessments of the enrichment trajectory, formed the context for the decision. In retrospect, the diplomatic signals preceding the attack were clear. The American statement that all options remain on the table was reinforced 3 times in 6 weeks in National Security Council communiqué. What was being calibrated was the timing, and the answer to whether the B-2 and the GBU-57 together were enough to execute the operation conclusively? The answer was yes, and the consequences of that answer immediately rippled through the entire regional architecture. On June 22, 2025, Russia didn't lose a single soldier. It didn't lose an inch of territory. It wasn't the target of any military action. But Russia lost something. Russia lost the narrative that the S-300, the air defense system it exports to dozens of countries as a core product of its global defense industry, was an effective response to cutting-edge US aerial threats. This is more than a matter of prestige. It's a market issue. The export logic of the S-300 and its successor, the S-400, rests on the premise that these systems create a sanctuary, a protective zone within which enemy air operations become prohibitively costly. When a customer buys a Russian air defense system, they are buying the promise that certain scenarios become too dangerous for an adversary to attempt. June 2025 empirically demonstrated that this promise has a limit. Against the B-2 with the GBU-57, the S-300 is irrelevant. It's not a matter of calibration or software versions. It's a matter of threat categories. And that limit is now documented live for all of Russia's current and potential customers to see. China is watching these developments with its characteristic attention, and it has direct implications to calculate. Beijing keeps variants of the S-300 and S-400 integrated into its air defense as part of its A-2 Anno Domini, anti-access area denial strategy. The question Chinese military planners are now answering is whether the defense architecture they built would perform the same against the B-2 as the Iranian architecture demonstrated. The answer: the same physical principles apply. China recognizes this, which is exactly why it has invested heavily in low-frequency radars as a specific countermeasure. The VHF and UHF radars that China installed along the Fujian coast and in forward positions in the South China Sea offer longer wavelengths, increasing sensitivity to low RCS geometries. But they have a fundamental problem: precision. A low-frequency radar detects that something is in the sky. It rarely provides enough resolution to track and engage with an interceptor missile. The B-2 doesn't need to be invisible to all radars. It needs to be invisible to the radars that can guide an interceptor missile to it. And this distinction is where the Chinese calculation has yet to find a satisfactory answer. For Washington, the operation created a new calculation. Follow-up strikes remain on the table as long as Iran maintains the capacity for nuclear reconstitution at new sites. But the United States has also opened a diplomatic window. The destruction of Fordow and Natanz is simultaneously a demonstration of capability and an implicit invitation to negotiations under new terms. What to watch for? Statements from the White House regarding preconditions for resuming nuclear negotiations, and State Department movements in third-party channels such as Oman and Switzerland. For Israel, the attack was the confirmation of a strategic bet decades in the making. The destruction of Fordow and Natanz immediately and irreversibly changes the country's perception of the Iranian nuclear threat window. For Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, the destruction of Iranian nuclear facilities removes an existential pressure from their short-term security horizon. But it creates a new one. A weakened and humiliated Iran is unpredictable in different ways than an Iran with developing nuclear capabilities. Energy markets felt the impact within hours. Persian Gulf oil had been trading with an embedded escalation risk premium since March 2025, estimated at between $8 and $12 per barrel in the futures markets. In the 48 hours following the attack, this premium recalibrated, but it didn't disappear. Maritime insurance premiums in the Strait of Hormuz rose. The market wasn't pricing in the end of the crisis. It was pricing in the next phase of it, and this is where the story stops being about an attack and starts being about something much bigger. Go back to the question this video started with. The radar operator didn't see his screens go blank because of a technical glitch. He saw the screens go blank because the architecture in front of him was never what Iran claimed it was. But here's what needs to be absolutely clear. What vanished in the early hours of June 22, 2025, wasn't just Iranian air defense. What vanished was a theory. That theory says middle powers can use layered air defense, especially combined with deeply buried facilities, to make military action by major powers prohibitively expensive. This theory was the foundation of Iran's deterrence strategy. It is also the logic governing defense investment decisions for dozens of states that lack the capacity to compete with the United States in conventional warfare intensity. The theory now has an irreversible empirical problem. The B-2 crosses the air defense layer without generating a detectable signal. The GBU-57 penetrates 200 feet, 61 meters, of reinforced concrete. The combination of the two simultaneously eliminates both aerial and underground protection. Fordo was built precisely at the intersection of these two forms of protection, and both failed at the same time, for the same reason. The American weapons system was designed specifically for this scenario. This isn't a simulation. This isn't a movie. It is a documented result. The question that remains now isn't theoretical. It's operational. How many countries built defense architectures based on the same principles Iran used? When you examine the export data for the S-300 and S-400, the answer is dozens. And they are all watching the same result you are analyzing right now. For every country looking at its own defense architecture and wondering if it stands up to the same test, the answer depends on whether you have any capability to detect aircraft with an RCS below 0.1 square meters, and whether your critical facilities are deeper than the GBU-57 can reach with the right attack trajectory. Most countries that built defenses based on the Iranian theory don't have that capability, and they don't have those depths. Depth equals immunity was the doctrine of Fordo. The GBU-57 is the argument that refutes that doctrine. And that argument was made live, irreversibly, before every strategic actor who needed to see it. The question isn't if Iran responds. The question is if Iran has anything left to respond with that changes the calculus. Let's examine the real options. The first option is kinetic escalation through proxies. Iran maintains a network of regional actors, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, who operate with capabilities ranging from short-range missiles to attack drones. Any escalation by these proxies would be a response Iran can execute without directly involving its degraded conventional forces. The limit of this option is clear. Escalating through proxies is an instrument of pressure, not reversal. It doesn't undo what happened at Fordo. It doesn't rebuild destroyed centrifuges. The second option is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has repeatedly threatened to close the strait in response to military action. The Strait of Hormuz is the 21-mile, 34-kilometer wide corridor at its narrowest point, through which approximately 20% of globally traded oil passes. Any Iranian operation to close or degrade traffic in that strait would trigger an immediate American naval response. With Iranian conventional deterrence now empirically weakened, the threat to the strait is simultaneously more tempting as a final instrument of leverage and more dangerous for Iran itself, because Iran's capacity for escalation is significantly lower than it was before June. The third option is the reconstitution of the nuclear program. Iran can signal or begin the reconstruction of capacity at new sites. This isn't immediate. The destroyed infrastructure represents years of work and billions of dollars. But it is the only option that maintains, in the long run, the deterrent tool that Iran lost in June. What indicators should we watch for in the coming weeks and months? First, statements from the Iranian Supreme National Security Council regarding the trajectory of the nuclear program and any claims of reconstruction at new sites. Second, naval movements in the Persian Gulf, IRGC deployment patterns that indicate the activation of the Hormuz option. Third, Russian statements on arms exports and their stance toward Iran. Any public distancing signals a strategic recalibration by Moscow. Fourth, maritime insurance prices in the Gulf as a real-time risk thermometer. The market will reflect it before any official communique. Fifth, Chinese statements on the Iranian nuclear program. Any pressure from Beijing on Tehran not to rebuild is a sign that China has prioritized regional stability over geopolitical alignment with Iran. The combination of these indicators will tell us more about the regional trajectory than any official statement. Numbers don't lie the way political declarations do. The question of what Iran does next remains open for now. The answer comes after we understand what remains of the Iranian strategic architecture, layer by layer, and what is being rebuilt. Stay with us. Operation Midnight Hammer wasn't primarily an attack on nuclear facilities. It was a live test of a deterrence theory, and the theory failed. What changed isn't just Iranian nuclear capability. What changed is the calculation for every state that based its deterrence strategy on that same theory. If you can't detect the B-2 and don't have facilities deeper than a GBU-57 can reach, then the architecture you built to protect yourself has a gap that June 2025 made empirically visible to the entire world. The indicators you should monitor are the ones we discussed: Iranian naval positioning in the Persian Gulf, signs of nuclear reconstruction at new sites, the Russian response to the public failure of the S-300, and the maritime risk premium in the Strait of Hormuz. Because Iran still controls that strait. And the Strait of Hormuz, this 34-kilometer corridor, is the last lever of deterrence left for a country whose nuclear program was just destroyed, and whose air defense proved not to be what they claimed. Check out the video on your screen right now. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.